What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Tool World podcast. Thanks for jumping in. Now, don't forget to check out our Tool World Plus program. We look into stances, patterns, detail work, a lot more. And then to kind of go off of that, we're going to be having a special seminar towards the beginning of fall. And I think that's going to be pretty big. We got lots of instructors to help us out and lots of learning to be done.
But before then, we also are doing another tool seminar. We're doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, Tool 3 seminar. And that's going to cover Yogo to Chungmu.
Yep. Just can't do it all in one day.
Well, this week we were taking a look at Kwange. We were taking a look at the upward block. After you do the knife hands, you turn around, you do an upward block in slow motion. And the question kind of came up. Is there a right way to do this? Is there a wrong way? You see a lot of differences, and they're small differences. They're not big differences.
Right.
So what do you think?
Well, if you think about the way the technique is performed and what the purpose is from a theoretical point of view, there is a right way. From a practical point of view, the only right way is if you're in self-defense is, are you the last one standing?
Right.
So, but when we're looking at patterns, for instance, in that movement in Gwange where you step back, what I did notice is some of the students, when they step back, they kind of, well, you do have to execute the block, but it's the way they turn, and then the block is kind of like already executed before they're actually in the full facing position, because you actually kind of need to be in a full facing position to execute it properly. From that theoretical point of view. That's very similar to we discussed on Do-san, where we execute the wedging block, where you go from F and then you go towards C. Actually, CD. No, not CD. CA, sorry. And what some in Do-san, just as a refresher, as we come across, the body is actually, it's kind of like some students do it like a side block and then they execute that, where the body actually has to be full facing so that you can execute the wedging block. And that's also the same, like in Gwange, because they're actually turning and the block is kind of coming at an angle, which is, like I said, it's from a self-defense point of view, if you block it, that's great. But from a theoretical point of view, it probably would miss because the body has to be in the full facing position to execute that particular technique.
Right.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think so.
You ever disagree with me?
No, I never disagree with that. So
because I'm an 8th degree in your 4th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you turn around, well, you have to actually be looking at your opponent, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I think if you look at it from a practical standpoint, that if you start turning and executing that block, do you really know what's there? Wouldn't it make more sense to turn and then execute the block as you step back?
Yeah, in some ways, but in some ways we also use our peripheral vision, right? So you kind of have a sense, right? But yeah, I mean, as far as patterns are concerned, sure, absolutely, that's kind of where we need to go. But not all patterns actually you're doing that, right? You're not always looking in that direction. Powan would be an example where you do the back. You don't look, you just, and then there's only, in Powan, you only look in certain directions when you're going to that direction, but you don't always look.
So are you saying, like, in things like Powan with that back elbow strike, that you're
already know
so good.
Well, you have eyes behind your head.
Well, okay. That you don't need to look?
Well, I think in the pattern Powan is a little bit slightly different. I mean, that back elbow strike, right? That means someone is behind you. Kind of like, what's that pattern? Yusin, right. So someone's grabbed you, notice that. You don't have to look, but then you do turn your body to look for that.
Right.
For the punches.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about some other techniques that we need to square off. You don't have any hip rotation. You saw one yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say there's no hip rotation. I think there is some hip rotation in a lot of techniques. But that big rotation of the hip. So one of the patterns I noticed some students doing was the rising block in Chungmu, where you go from the upward block and they turned around and then they executed a rising block. But it looked more like they were rotating and blocking, where rising block is really full facing and you shoot it straight up. And so if you're going to do that, you kind of actually have to square off before you execute it. Now that's really kind of interesting because it's will it look choppy? Will it look smooth? Will it look right? You understand what I'm saying? It's that transition point from that full facing or that side facing to execute the rising block or that upward block. It's that transition time where you can reduce it enough where it's smooth and yet you're still executing the technique properly. I think you did a little video on Instagram or whatever on the like reverse turning kick. We talked about that and why it looked like it was a hooking kick versus a reverse turning kick. And it's that being able to control that and make it so it's smooth enough so that you can identify that, hey, that was a reverse turning kick or that was a reverse offensive hook kick. And it's those little details that is really intriguing to me.
Right. So that kind of brings up a question for me of, is there too much? Is there such a thing as too much hip rotation? Obviously, like too much pullback, but how practical is hip rotation? We know that it can generate more power because you're moving more mass, bigger muscles right there.
Right.
But is that something that you would ever see in real life? I mean, some things happen so fast. Would you ever have time to be able to do something like that?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I mean, well, I had someone that asked if I would help their child. Well, child, obviously an older child, teenager, on maybe can I help them with that hip rotation in executing, like throwing a baseball or a bat. I'm like, well, I don't really play baseball, but I can definitely look at the way the movement is done, and I could give you some ideas on what I think as far as body mechanics,
right,
and how it could help us generate power. So absolutely, I think that even if you look at, let's say, boxing, if you look at the way they're landing that major knockout power punch, right? They're getting their body behind it, or they're getting their hip behind it. And so, yes, I think so. I think that if you want that massive amount of power, you've got to get the whole body into it, and that hip's got to be in there as well. Some techniques, obviously, you're not going to do a lot of that. Turning kicks with a rear leg, reverse turning kicks, or those kind of things, you're whipping it around. That's giving you lots of speed, lots of power in that way.
Right.
Oh, I guess, yeah, power, energy, whatever you want to call it. So the more distance you have, in theory, the more time you get to accelerate, and that's why you can do more destruction.
Right.
So a 1-inch punch, which is cool, can it break 5 boards?
No.
Maybe. Depends if you get that hip behind it.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a pretty good discussion on hip rotation, turning, on all those certain moves. So thanks for jumping in to another Tool World podcast. We'll see you guys next week. Don't forget to be safe,
keep training,
and have a great week.
Taekwon.